Myst is iconic. Beyond defining an entire generation of puzzle games, it also demonstrated the potential of the CD-ROM. There have been more ports and remakes of it than pretty much anything but Doom itself, which, fun fact, first came out a few months after Myst's release on the Mac. The most recent Myst remake came out in 2021. It was built in Unreal Engine 4, with a VR mode even, so you could fully immerse yourself in the wonders of Myst Island. For extra replayability, there's even a mode that randomizes some of the puzzle solutions. And conveniently, you can now carry both brothers' pages at once, which saves on a lot of repetitive backtracking. And graphically, it's absolutely stunning. Far better video essayists than me have already said quite a lot of things about Myst, including HBomberGuy, whose Patreon backer exclusive video on it I strongly recommend once you're done with this one. But those videos are usually about Myst proper. This is about what came next, namely Riven and then Exile. Myst has a half dozen sequels and spin-offs, and there's no question that Riven has the greatest following, which is probably why in October 2022, Cyan announced they were doing a remake. I'll admit, I definitely wasn't expecting that. That said, I'm eager to see what they add. Riven is a triumph of world building. The way we gradually learn more and more about the Rivenese makes it a jewel of fictional anthropology. I'll never forget the hum of the Rivenese guard tower's alarm as you approach their village. Riven is such a vivid world, you can remember it decades later. The original version came with a catalog so you could order souvenir artifacts, which are quite the prize for collectors, I'm sure. Riven's world is also vast. Transiting between its multiple islands on fantastic vessels was the absolute highlight of my experience playing it as a kid. It's so vast, I can see a solid argument for calling it an open world game, in spirit anyway. I've talked a fair bit about the vibes of various games on this channel, and Riven's vibes are exceptional. Just the vibe you get from existing in its world is enough to make it worth cherishing. And yet, is that enough to make it a great game? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Riven is a bad game, Atris forbid, but, well, if you're a fan of Riven, I have to ask, how was your first experience of beating it? Riven is famously inscrutable.
Man, I solved Myst in 10 minutes, why can't I do this?
In Myst, the core progression is straightforward. You get the pages from the ages and take a look in the book. But Riven's large and sprawling world can make progress rather haphazard. It pulls you in a lot of different directions as you try to get into new areas and find scattered bits of information. Concepts like the Dunny number system provide keys for other puzzles, and so on. If you squint, you can see the bones of the progression system the Outer Wilds would use to great effect decades later. Notably, Outer Wilds gives you something that I would argue is critical to making this kind of progression system work: the ship's log. It records your findings, it hints at connections between locations, and subtly, it points you in the right directions. For a lot of Riven fans, writing all this out yourself was part of the appeal. But remember, Riven doesn't give you anything. This results in hours spent wandering the world looking for the slightest hint. Now, that's definitely its own vibe, and Riven is beautiful, but eventually that loses its appeal. Riven is, if you'll forgive me for saying so, the Dark Souls of its genre. You can even see echoes of this in Cyan saying they're not gonna dumb down the remake.
Just to clarify, we're not dumbing down the game. It's not that kind of stuff. It's actually just making it a little more accessible.
Clearly they're aware of the game's extreme difficulty and are aiming to preserve it as part of the experience. But I have to ask, is all that difficulty really worth preserving? Riven is so obtuse, I have to wonder if anyone was able to beat it without using the official guide. And yes, clarifying the marble locations counts as using a guide. If you beat the game with no guide, well, are you really sure that you did? If you are really sure that you did, please leave me a comment calling me a lame casual or something, because I genuinely want to know what someone who can beat Riven without hints is like. All this is to say that Riven is a wonderfully coherent, believable world that truly feels as if people live in it. What it is not, however, is a great puzzle game. This is why I prefer Exile to Riven. While there's not a tremendous amount of Myst course on the relative qualities of the Myst sequels, it's pretty clear that I'm in the minority. But even if you disagree with me, stick around. There's a lot more to Exile than you might remember. Exile wasn't made by Cyan, even though Rand Miller, Cyan's founder and CEO, was still Atris. I can see how that by itself could be enough to turn some people off.
I did a poll internally and I was like, which Myst game is your favorite? And many of us said Riven. Some of us said Myst 3, which was weird.
Lord knows there are plenty of examples of franchises going completely off the rails after the original creators leave. Instead, Exile was developed by Presto Studios, known for the Journeyman Project series. Exile is a far better sequel to Myst than it is to Riven. Exile's hub world, Janine, serves as a hub in the same way Myst Island does. The focused mechanics of progression are back also. This was a very deliberate choice in development. Regrettably, there's no cultural exploration, except for a few scraps of world building in the antagonist's journal entries and murals. The ages you visit in Exile are unpopulated, except for the final one, and even then you don't see much of it. In structure, each age is roughly linear in terms of the order you do the puzzles in, even more so than in Myst. But what Exile lacks in ambition, it more than makes up for in execution. This was not merely some lazy-ass third-party cash-in using the Myst license. Presto spent 9 whole months just planning the design of the game on paper. That said, when I sat down to replay Exile before making this video, I was worried that it wouldn't hold up at all. That the graphics would be dated, that the puzzles would be cumbersome, that the plot would be hammy. But upon finishing it, I found that it held up astonishingly well. Most of the time. If you have the time to play it and it looks interesting to you, I would pick it up. As you might expect, I'm going to explain the plot, the ages, and many of the puzzle solutions, so spoiler warning. Exile starts with you, the stranger, visiting Atris in Tomahna. Now, contrary to what some may have thought, Tomahna isn't a standalone age, but a place on Earth. It's not far from the cleft where you start Uru, even. As you look around, having a little taste of the weather in New Mexico, you quickly notice a fairly massive departure from Myst and Riven. Mouse look. I always found this a very interesting compromise between the static perspectives of the old games and the full freedom later remakes would give you. Now, it's important to remember that Exile came out in 2001. Barring a few standouts, fully 3D games were still shaking off the hangover of 90s-style 3D graphics. Yet Exile's graphics have aged very gracefully. Now, I'm not an expert in 3D rendering, but this can't have been easy to pull off. Anyhow, Atris invited you to experience the new age he's written, Release Sean. I say written, but it's worth noting that most people in the game anyway, believe that the ages already exist out there in Myst's seemingly infinite multiverse, waiting to be connected. Describing a world in a book written in a Dunny dialect called Garo Hevti resolves the link, with the author even able to make changes to the world after the link is established. The process of creating these descriptive books is called the art, with a capital A, and it is hard with a capital H. Atris' father, Gen, was pretty garbage at it, with one of his few successes while locked up in Riven being age 233. Implying quite a few prior failures. If you ever wondered where most of the forest went in Riven, it went to these failed books. In addition to these dunny thick descriptive books, there are also the much thinner linking books, which are essentially pointers to their related descriptive book. I know I'm already down a rabbit hole talking through all of this cosmology before the game's even properly begun, but you really have to appreciate the endless potential of the concept. Even though multiverses have been well run into the ground by this point, there's still so much you can do with this authorial angle, conjuring, connecting, and modifying these new worlds. The allegory potential drips off the screen, and the parallels between writing an age and creating a novel, or say an award-winning puzzle game, are obvious. And yet, to my heartbreak, there remains little new exploration of this, nothing but remakes and remasters. Quite the accidental meta-commentary, that. Regardless, I'll leave the allegories for the many, many thousands of other Myst-tubers to unpack. Anyway, where was I? Ah yes, Riven. After you faff around in Atris' study for a bit, he greets you and hands you a journal about his time creating Riven. Armed with the knowledge of what comes next, this makes sense gameplay-wise, but without that context, this gives off a powerful neurodivergent energy. Atris, man, I thought we were going to hang out. Tell me about it yourself when we're there. As another neurodivergent who spent way too long trapped indoors, I get it though.
Who the devil are you?
Atris walks back over to his desk to fetch something. To everyone's surprise, a disheveled man links into the study. Enter SAAVE, the eponymous exile. He steals Riven, sets the study on fire, and links out. Thinking fast, you follow him before fire consumes the linking book. Now real quick, it's worth highlighting the stakes here. Riven is the new home Atris wrote for the Dunny people. If its descriptive book was destroyed, the link to it would be lost. Once a descriptive book is gone, it's gone. You can't just write a new book to connect to its age. So Atris' horror at its theft is quite warranted. After the wonderful introductory flyby, you find yourself on Janine, the aforementioned hub of the game. You chase SAAVE to the tall structure at the center of the age, but he gets there first and locks the door behind him. You can see him menacingly pacing inside. Finding another entrance to this place is the first real puzzle in the game. After some exploration, you find a colorful workshop where SAAVE seems to have carved out a place for himself. You find his journal and an elevator up. However, upon taking the elevator, you find yourself unable to get out. SAAVE taunts you.
Atris? Is that you? Come to rescue your book so soon? Not yet, old friend. Not yet.
He has quite the beef with Atris. His vision must not be great though, as you are decidedly not Atris. Incidentally, if SAAVE here seems familiar, it may be because he was Grima Wormtongue in The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, after you take the elevator back down to the workshop, the first puzzle begins in earnest. The solution is that you don't actually have to be in the elevator when it goes up, and once the mechanical parts underneath are exposed, you can reconfigure them. You have a few different settings to play with, and in principle, you could simply try every single possible combination, but you're not meant to brute force it. The solution is right there in SAAVE's journal. This is an interesting test of your willingness to engage with the world of Exile. Are you going to actually read the journal, or just toss it aside as world building? There's also another purpose to this puzzle using the journal. There are exactly 2 puzzles where you have to use information from the journals. The very first one and the very last one. That's right, the game is literally bookended. Subtle stuff like that is why I say most people write off Exile way too quickly. There's a lot going on beneath the surface. It's an interesting test of retention. At the very end, can you remember the trick you used only once at the very beginning? Of course, SAAVE's journal also includes some of his backstory. You find out the real targets of his ire are Cirrus and Akinar, who you may remember as Atris' monstrous sons from Myst. Failing to locate them, he elected to take vengeance on Atris instead. We also find out he comes from an age called Narayan. Upon solving the first puzzle and taking the elevator up, we see him exit Janine using a linking book cradled in a device which quickly retracts afterwards. Nice of him to wait until we were done with the first puzzle. Searching the room, you find some more pages of SAAVE's journal. You uncover quite a few of them over the course of the game. He definitely spread them around himself, intending Atris to find them. Not only is this very drama queeny, it's also a great diegetic reason for the lore to be spread out. Now these specific pages help explain why SAAVE is so angry with Atris's boys. They started a civil war on Narayan. Civil wars are bad enough in normal settings, but here the deaths of thousands meant that no one was paying attention to the rituals that maintained the age, leading to devastation. There's also a projector in the room. When started, it plays part of a message from Atris.
My sons, I promise to teach you the secrets of my ages. This world is the first step on your journey. Search the island, and you'll find 3 linking books.
Which is quickly interrupted by a message from SAAVE.
Hello, Atris. Been a long time. Sorry I'm not there to greet you in person, but I just didn't think it would be wise, considering how long I've been stuck here. Trapped in these lesson ages by 2 very greedy little boys. Your sons, Atris.
These messages set the stage very effectively. Turns out Atris wrote these lesson ages as part of Cirrus and Akinar's education. This also provides a diegetic reason for the puzzles. On a much grimmer note, you learn that Saavedro has been stuck here away from his family for 20 years. And all of this just to provide an educational lesson for 2 spoiled brats. To his credit, Brad Dourif sells Saavedro's entirely justified rage very, very well.
20 years, Atris. 20 long years alone.
Anyhow, the core method of progression is also firmly established here too, retrieving the new symbols that open the device in the center of the room. Given how some of these symbols appear in their respective ages, it's pretty impressive that SAAVE pulled this modification off. This change prevents Atris from opening the device immediately, though there doesn't seem to be anything preventing him from taking a Michael Jordan leap to get at the book. Maybe it's part of the canon that nobody in the Myst series can jump. At any rate, after the message is delivered, the game opens up. You now have the freedom to tackle the 3 main ages in any order. Though getting to any of these 3 ages requires solving 2 puzzles. It's another excellent element of the game's design that the first part of each age unlock puzzle serves as a tutorial for a concept utilized in that age's puzzles. To unlock Edanna, the Age of Nature, you have to project the sound of a creature. To unlock Amateria, the Age of Dynamic Forces, you have to tinker with the controls of a machine. To unlock Voltaic, the Age of Energy, you have to redirect light. After solving the initial puzzle to gain access to each tusk, you have to then solve the second puzzle to unlock the actual linking book contained within. This requires you to line up the glyph on the lens of each telescope in the observatory with that on its related tusk. After matching up the glyphs, you record the positions of each of the settings orbs on the telescope and feed them into the machine next to each linking book. Now, this is a good puzzle in concept, except for one of the settings being a depth of field focus. Exile's graphics have aged very well, mostly, but trying to get the glyph perfectly into focus is all but impossible. You get no feedback for when you're on target except for this muddy visual. Can't imagine how anyone handled this glaucomascope in Exile's PS2 version. This is in stark contrast to the listening device in Myst's Selenitic age, which explicitly tells you when you're on target. I don't think it would have been unreasonable to give the player some kind of similar indication here, or better yet, not having a depth of field setting at all. There's good difficulty, and then there's bad difficulty. They're not always easy to tell apart, but this is definitely the second kind. At best, it's just going to lead to backtracking and trying combinations over and over, leading to frustration. Of course, the intervening 2 decades have seen the rise of the game walkthrough industrial complex. I really don't like doing this. Solving the puzzle is the point of the game, right? But players should never be forced to grind out puzzle solutions because of a lack of clarity, especially not for such an early puzzle. At any rate, after solving the requisite puzzles, you can choose which age to begin with. For this playthrough, I chose Amateria. I imagine a lot of people choose Amateria first as it seems the closest tusk, distance-wise, and its unlocking puzzle is arguably the most straightforward. Immediately after linking to Amateria, the vibe hits you. The very excellent music of the age gracefully sets in. There's a thunderstorm visible in the distance over the water. Closer by, you see the local architecture. Exile might not have as many ages as Myst, but every age it brings is solid, evoking a tremendous sense of place. Unlike Myst, you have the exit linking book readily available in each age if you'd like to visit other ages before completing this one. This becomes especially relevant in Amateria as the first puzzle of the age presents something of a difficulty wall, the balance beam puzzle. The puzzle is deceptively simple, adding weights of various materials to a counterweight tied to one end of a beam, and adjusting the fulcrum point such that the beam completely balances with a sphere on the other side, letting a sphere of ice travel across the beam. You even get feedback on if you're over or under the desired weight based on the failure animation. However, guessing and testing your way through this puzzle is a beginner's trap. This is a puzzle that you're meant to solve mathematically using the weight ratios of the different substances, modified by the position of the fulcrum. And how are you supposed to know these ratios? Well, they were in plain sight earlier in Saavedro's study back on Janine. This is the one puzzle that I would argue absolutely requires information from another age. The study also has a hint for the trapped bird puzzle in Edanna, but that one can be reasonably solved without the hint just by playing normally and interacting with everything. Even if you don't remember the information, I guess it's fair that you're expected to remember where it was, but that's still a bit of a hurdle and not quite in line with the puzzles of the rest of the game. That said, it does make the ages feel more interconnected. Diegetically, this evokes the paths that Saavedro must have walked hundreds of times before your arrival. Setting aside the balance beam puzzle, I have to compliment the design of Amateria's other puzzles. Amateria's puzzles are a real carnival thrill ride. A few of them remind me a bit of playing Space Chem. Step by step, you gradually get all the pieces working properly. In the case of the resonance ring puzzle, you configure the rings to turn off in the correct order so a sphere can pass through them. It's a solid puzzle, but like the Janine telescope, it has a readability issue. Intuitively, you would think you could walk down the expected path of the sphere, changing the configuration of the rings on the way through, but the path it took deviated sharply from what I expected. And no, I don't think there was some hidden reason that I never figured out. I think it's fair to conclude that the visual presentation is at odds with the mechanics. Regardless, a few quick trips back and forth to change specific rings and try again isn't unreasonable. Still, a bit fiddly. It helps that the resonances the rings make kind of slaps. The third puzzle in the age is another fun one, fairly intuitive once it clicks. You can build out progress gradually as you try different combinations of pegs. Though I will say, as nice as the graphics are here, it's still a little hard to tell where the ball is supposed to go. Can you tell, looking at it? It's here. Again, readability can be the difference between entertaining puzzles and puzzles that feel unnecessarily confusing and frustrating. After solving the three major puzzles of the age, you enter the large structure in the center, where the final puzzle awaits you. I always loved this animation of the walkway shifting into position. Anyway, you're also rewarded for making it this far with a Saavedrogram.
What's the matter, Atris? Can't remember how things work?
Now, the final puzzle is something really special. You have to configure the tracks within the central building to allow a glass sphere to pass all the way through every puzzle you've solved in the age, and then to the final platform. This puzzle is very readable once you've experimented a bit. You can see required pieces of track slide into place in front of the final platform after the sphere makes it through each of the previously solved puzzle areas, hinting that it comes last. The actual mechanics of where the ball comes in and out of the system are clearly labeled too. Still can be a little tricky as there is only one valid combination. But once you start to work your way backwards from what can't be the solution, the puzzle becomes clearer. After you solve the puzzle, you're rewarded for your efforts with the standout cinematic sequence of the game, if not the entire series. You get to ride the entire path you just constructed from the perspective of the ball. It's an incredible sequence, and you can tell they took notes from the fantastical transport sequences in Riven. Finally, the sphere comes to a stop and you receive your first set of symbols. Conveniently, the stranger is quite the calligrapher. With the symbols retrieved, you return to Janine and input the drawing into a device in the center of the observatory. After this, you receive another message from SAAVE. Turns out the brothers claimed to want to make Narayan better, but were really just looking to loot it. Quite the interdimensional imperialists. Anyway, since the brothers' education started in Amateria and then went to Edanna, let's go there next as well. Again, Exile provides a stunning visual intro for the age. Edanna takes place within a gigantic tree, crawling with all kinds of life. Gameplay-wise, Edanna is maybe the easiest age in any Myst game, not including the glorified cutscene ages. Honestly, this can be something of a breath of fresh air, serving as a nice break between the more difficult ages. The main challenge of Edanna is finding the right path forward, as the various winding biomes often make it a bit difficult. And forgive me, when I did my playthrough, I'd completely forgotten about that passage in a lower swamp area and had to look up a map. Another victory for the walkthrough industrial complex. Edanna's puzzles are quite different from Amateria's. Here the focus is on organic systems, identifying which plants interact with each other and how. Take for example this puzzle in Upper Edanna. First you have to interact with a plant that's blocking another plant from getting sunlight. This second plant functions as a biological magnifying glass, focusing the sunlight to burst a bulb of water that feeds a second spiral vine that you can use to get to another area. Spiral Vine 2 looks too intense for me though. All of this goes with the educational theme of the age. Nature encourages mutual dependence, as described in Atris's journal. This moral does ring a little strangely if you take it in the context of our modern relationship with the environment, but in the context of writing ages, I suppose it's a fine lesson. Aside from the flora, there's an interesting variety of fauna. Take for example this electrified cephalopod here. One of the major puzzles of the age requires you to send them on quite the journey through something of an organic network for water.
New squid in a globe!
You use this guy to free a bird being eaten by a tremendous plant. There's also this adorable little guy called a squee. Don't give me that look, the game predates the modern internet usage of the word by a lot. Its chirps make barnacle moss flowers bloom, which is also used in the puzzle to unlock the age. There's also this strange leaf creature that you can use to backtrack. I can't quite put my finger on it, but this thing is kind of upsetting on a primal level. Perhaps because it's one of the few things in the game capable of jumping. Still, a fabulous visual design to be sure. Finally, after navigating to the lowest point of the age and setting a few plants up, you are picked up and treated to an aerial tour of the age by the bird you saved.
It's a living.
Scouring through the Myst subreddit indicates that some people were extremely put off by this. But I think it speaks to the level of detail that can be written into an age. I'm reminded of Evelyn connecting a dimension based purely on her misremembering of Ratatouille and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Honestly, I think the multiverse concept works best in leaning into this kind of absurdity, though I entirely get why people would take issue with this relative to the more mechanized way most ages in the series are solved. After a brief slide down from the bird's nest, you encounter the symbols for the age and jot them down. You really have to hand it to SAAVE for his craftsmanship in modifying the glyphs here. It could not have been easy to twist the vines into those exact shapes. As before, you exit the age back to Janine. After you input the glyphs into the machine, the device containing the book to Narayan rises in the center of the room, and the arms open. Again, this seems eminently jumpable to me, but the book is not accessible yet. You also receive another message from Savidro.
I read all about the Dunning, how you started their world again. Can you really do that, Atris? After everything that's happened to Narayan, could you start their world over again? I don't think so. I think there's too much blood on our hands, too many ghosts. Surely you can't change that with a pen stroke.
SAAVE isn't wrong to point out the double standard here. Atris really ought to have, if nothing else, checked in on Narayan when he visited the Lesson Ages. Knowing what he now knows about what Cirrus and Akinar are capable of, it's pretty irresponsible of him to not check up on the ages with civilizations that they had access to. Even though Atris never considered himself a god, his neglect of Narayan could be seen as a tremendous dereliction of his duty as a connector of worlds. After you link to Voltaic, you are immediately greeted by the music of the age. The Voltaic tracks blend an aura of mysticism with an electronic resonance, as if you're standing before some kind of machine god. Almost Lynchian, really. This is perfectly in line with the theme of the age, energy powers future motion, which is pretty vacuous, but at least it's more than Amateria's theme, dynamic forces spur change, which is essentially a tautology. Remember, the first rule of Tautology Club is the first rule of Tautology Club. Again, these principles likely read better as guidance for performing the art. The fun of Voltaic is in getting the grand production machines of the age online and configuring the machines that receive their outputs. It's not hard to deduce that the first objective of the age is to get the hydroelectric dam working. This is mostly straightforward, but it can be difficult to notice that you need to look out a broken window in the dam to set the turbine in motion. This sabotage is almost certainly SAAVE's doing. It's an interesting element throughout the Ages of Exile that the difficulty of the puzzles can diegetically be traced to two sources, Atris in his creation of the Ages, and SAAVE in his sabotage of them. For example, at the boiler puzzle, the control panel isn't entirely usable because someone shoved a huge spike through it. But there's an auxiliary control in the boiler room where you can fix the steam production directly, as you're forced to admire SAAVE's mural painted on the boiler itself. The other standout puzzle of the age is essentially a throwback to the generator puzzle in Myst. You need to power an airship by feeding it the exact right amount of steam. This involves opening and closing exactly the right number of valves, which are on different floors, reachable by an elevator, which is also powered by steam. Once you've got the basic idea down, it's not that difficult to figure out the proper configuration, especially as, unlike with the generators in Myst, each floor's valves output the same amount of steam when closed. Once the airship is powered up, and assuming you've done everything else in the age correctly, you get to take a victory lap. I've always loved this animation of the doors opening. Look at that subtle shaking of the gate arms as the iris dilates. Really helps with the verisimilitude. Once you hop on board the airship, you get to glide through the canyon in style, the vibrations of each passing pillar setting you all a-quiver. Again, this evokes the transport sequences in Riven. Finally, after coming to a stop above the starting location of the age, you are met with a perfectly ordinary, totally unsuspicious lever. If you pull it, and why shouldn't you, a miracle happens. In a game full of breathtaking moments, this one is definitely a high point, the full power of the age on display. Upon entering the now floating tower and opening the hatch on the bottom, you glimpse the symbols of the age. Now, it seems rather unbelievable SAAVE was able to modify this one, but a journal entry specifically calls out that he used some of the floating stone from Amateria. SAAVE is indeed a man of many talents. A conveniently stored linking book allows you to return to Janine. After entering the final symbol, you surprisingly don't receive another message from SAAVE, but the original stored one from Atris.
The linking book you see here connects to an age called Narayan. It's a very delicate age, where civilization has emerged in response to the world's imbalances. It's also the first inhabited age I'm sending you to alone. But don't be afraid. The knowledge you've acquired here will show you the way in. Use it, and see all that Narayan has to offer.
This is definitely an intentional play by SAAVE to really twist a knife. You can tell he wants Atris to recontextualize his own last line as an invitation to plunder the age, an invitation which the brothers very obviously seized upon. Finally, the Narayan book is fully accessible. And so you enter Narayan, or at least a very small part of it. Surrounding the small structure you link to on all sides is a shield of ice. Presumably, this system was set up by Atris to add a layer of separation between Narayan and the rest of the Lesson Ages. This shield has been preventing Savidro from returning to what's left of his village.
You're stuck here.
It's worth considering the thought process that would cause Atris to erect such a hard border, keeping them separated from the wider Myst universe, locked in their own age. Moreover, this denies them travel to the rest of the Lesson Ages, even as he uses Narayani symbols in all of them, flaunting his knowledge of their culture. This denial of transit, this exile, if you will, may be less cruel than what his sons did, but it's still pretty damn evil. Of course, we probably don't need to interrogate this choice too much, because that's the whole point of the game. Not only does Savidro's exile have to be meaningful, the defacement of the Lesson Ages has to be traceable to him and him alone. Speaking of SAAVE, here you come face to face with him for the first time. He's less than thrilled that you've stumbled into the trap he set so carefully for Atris.
You're not... Where is he? Look, I know he's here. I have his book. So where is he? He didn't come. I take relation from him, and he sends you instead. So you're just as stuck here as I am. At least until I open this book, and I show Atris what it's like to watch your friends and relatives die. Find a way out of here, I suggest that you think very carefully about using it. Because the one thing I know about linking books, the doors they open don't close behind you.
He leaves you alone with the final puzzle of the game, and it's a doozy. You are presented with two control panels where you can enter Narayani symbols. One of the control panels has room for 3 different sets of 4, and the other only has room for a single set of 4. On the wall of this room are a variety of tapestries with the symbols labeled with their English equivalents. Notably, SAAVE is wearing a missing tapestry. Now, clearly the correct symbols to enter into the control panels are somehow related to the ones you've recorded in the various ages, but that's not the whole story, they're just hints. Now, remember what I said earlier, the solution to this last puzzle is in the journal you've been carrying with you the whole time, the one Atris gave you at the very beginning. The combinations are the key lessons he describes in this journal, which, helpfully, are bolded. Energy powers future motion, nature encourages mutual dependence, dynamic forces spur change, and finally, balanced systems stimulate civilizations. After realizing this element of the puzzle, it then becomes a matter of figuring out the symbols for each of these phrases. The final phrase contains symbols not on any of the still hanging tapestries. Presumably they're on the tapestry Savidro is wearing, and he doesn't seem particularly cooperative. Additionally, this final phrase doesn't have any part of the symbols from the 3 ages. This identifies it as the odd one out for the second console later. After figuring out the rest of the symbols, we come to my least favorite aspect of the puzzle, namely, where do you start? Again, there's a hint for this in the drawings the stranger etched. In particular, have a look at the one for Amateria, whose orientation is horizontal. After inputting that set of symbols, it's just a matter of figuring out where the other 2 symbols go. You can see the pattern of entry for all of them confirmed when the glyphs lock into place, starting at the top and moving clockwise. It is a little much, even with this being the last major puzzle of the game, but at least it's not marbles. Following the successful entry of the other two sets of symbols, you can bring down the inner ice shield and reveal a path to the lower area of the structure. Inside, you find a book to Tomahna, which, unlike the vast majority of linking books in the setting, you can take with you. You can also use it immediately. But as SAAVE alluded to earlier, this is a mistake, leading to a bad ending. You also come across another set of tapestries, containing the missing symbols you need to complete the final set. Upon entering the set into the secondary console, SAAVE gets his miracle.
Oh my god. They're alive?
A short-lived miracle, though, as the controls prevent him from inactivating the inner and outer shields at the same time. I have to say, though, the distance from the roof to the platform beyond the inner shield doesn't seem that far. I could probably jump that. I'm calling it. Either nobody in this universe can jump, or Atris seriously needs to rethink his security systems. Anyhow, SAAVE implores you to make a deal with him.
Drop the outer barrier when I'm out by the gondola. Switch the shield so the outer barrier is open. And in return, I'll give up relation.
If you don't actually do anything and just stare at him awkwardly, he gets frustrated and attacks you.
Stop! Hammer time!
If you agree to his offer, though, he screws you over, just yeets the book off the platform and takes off. And you know what? Good for him. After everything Atris and his sons put him through, nearly destroying his world for educational purposes, he doesn't owe them shit. You can even return empty-handed to Tomahna after this.
Watch this, Lise. You can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half. And now.
But no, that's not canon. What you're actually meant to do is drop the power using the control on the roof of the structure, raising both shields and trapping him between them. From this bargaining position, he wisely parts with Relishon. The art of the deal, baby. Interestingly, you can choose whether to leave him trapped or not, with a full ending cutscene for each choice. But I imagine the canon choice is freeing him, and letting him go live on the fat of the land. From there, all that's left is to return Relishon to Tomahna. Atris is understandably very relieved to have that book back. After this interlude, the final cutscene plays.
The best we can hope for is to continue to learn. To take from the past only that which is good, and move on.
Take from the past only that which is good? Yeah, that sounds kinda revisionist there, Atris. Just moving on without doing any atonement? The least he could do would be to rewrite Narayan so they wouldn't need the maintenance rituals quite so often, but oh well. I hope I've been able to convey just how special Exile is. There was every reason in the world to expect that an outside studio would drop the ball and betray the series' pedigree, but miraculously, they pulled it off. And they didn't have a gigantic modern AAA team either. Exile was made by a team of 25 on Pentium 3s spending God knows how many hours staring at 3DS Max and C++ code, with successfully executed live-action FMV segments to boot. That's not easy to pull off.
I say.
Nice move, Ace. Now, where'd I put that towel?
Sadly, the game hasn't been given its due. In a post-mortem on the game, one of the founders of Presto Studios points a finger at the publisher. Exile started development with Mindscape as their publisher, who you might be familiar with as the developer of Lego Island. However, through various mergers and acquisitions, Ubisoft became their publisher. The founder recounts, "What we felt should have been a huge launch was, in our opinion, slightly disappointing. A great multilingual feature of the game was cancelled in the last few weeks. Our presence at E3 was minimal due to our producer being taken out of the loop on the decision-making process. Advertisements were scarce and short-lived, and negotiations for a possible sequel ground to a halt. An absolute tragedy that Exile seems to have been one of Ubisoft's first victims. The game was quality, and it deserved full publisher support. Looking at its Steam page, it has a scant 300 reviews, which, granted, is more reviews than most games from that time period have, but it's still deeply unfortunate that its mainstream reception largely consists of that one Myst game Cyan didn't make. I hope that I have done Exile justice in this video, as despite a few fumbles, it legitimately remains one of the best games of its kind. If what I've shown looks good to you, still consider picking it up. How many multi-decade-old games from your collection can you say look this good? Anyway, with all that said, a very big thank you for watching the whole video. If you liked it, please really do like and subscribe. As you can see, this is a very small channel, so every single like and sub is more motivation to keep me making these videos. Thank you again. Dunny thick